It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another segment of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck, and of course that means some smart talk radio is in your future, and this segment, no exception. We've not talked about in 780-odd shows this exact subject, and that is the current state of medical errors in the health field. And we're going to be talking to Dr. Carol Gunn again, who has some very, very strong opinions about this, and justifiably so when you hear her story. She practices medicine on the West Coast and said Americans should be angry and outraged that medical mistakes are the third leading cause of death in America. With that as kind of a dark precursor of what is to come, Dr. Gunn, how are you, my friend?
I'm well today, but yes, I am angry about medical errors.
Well, we know, let's do this. We'll do a little bit better setup. We want to talk about a very recently released report from the Institute of Medicine on medical error deaths in the United States. It just came out recently, but if you would, again, this issue of medical deaths, medical error deaths rather, is very close to home to you.
Yes, it's very close to home to me because I lost my sister in May of 2014 at a well-respected teaching hospital due to medical errors. And I found it. I said, this wasn't right, reviewed her records, and then had to go back to the hospital and say, you missed it. So yes, very close to home.
Do they, when you have a case of medical error that, again, whether it's right or not, cynically, people probably immediately think lawsuit, malpractice of some kind. When you say medical error, are you focusing specifically, or more specifically, so to speak, on the institutions or the private practice doctors? Tell us about that.
So Anna had her health struggles, and she actually had chest pain that went unrecognized from February basically to May, and then she died in May due to a heart attack. So she saw both outpatient physicians as well as was hospitalized. Even when she was hospitalized, they didn't recognize, even though she was complaining of chest pain and told them she had this 2-month history of it, no one recognized it as cardiac. So it's really an institutional issue because it was a group think that did not see, oh gosh, she is having heart issues. So, and our family is not suing for malpractice. We want change in the institution. Money's not going to bring Anna back.
Why do we not, and again, you're way inside on this, why do we, and I don't think I'm too far off, why does this subject, why don't I feel like it's front and center?
I don't know why either. I mean, there's been studies since 1999 when this was a really big deal to the healthcare industry. In 1999, To Err Is Human was released by the Institute of Medicine. They estimated 80,000 folks die a year from it. In 2013, another report said, no, it's actually 200 to 400,000 people a year. That's the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. So I don't know why people aren't focused on it. I think a lot of people think, oh, that person was already sick, so, it doesn't matter as much. It's what I'm thinking that people are supposing.
Why, let's do this. Undoubtedly, you've studied this for a long time. You're very interested. You're a physician yourself. Are medical error deaths, are they on the increase, and are medical mistakes being made more and more often? And if they are, why is that?
I actually think there probably are on the increase, but I think they're different kinds of errors. I think we're having less errors of wrong side surgeries and things to that extent. But the electronic medical record, even though it's a great boon because now everyone can read it, you don't have bad handwriting, what's happening is people are copying and pasting previous notes over and over and over again. And so if there's something wrong in your medical record, but it keeps getting copy and pasted into the newest note, you can't get it out. Anna was kind of a victim of that, too. A lot of her outpatient notes were just copy and pasted forward with only one or two lines out of a very long document changed, along with her vitals. So it was hard to even figure out what medication she was on at times.
Because this is, and again, I know this has been a focus for you, but if it's possible, take your sister's case out of this. Mm-hmm. Were you concerned about this before all of this happened, or was that really the trigger event?
I would say it was definitely a trigger event. I was aware there were errors going on, and I've taken great pains not to have it. That's my type A personality, but I don't really think I understood the enormity of them. And when I practiced in the hospital, when I was going through my residency, we were not using electronic medical records yet. I think with electronic medical records, I think more of them are coming to light, as well as we're getting more of them from the electronic medical records.
When you, undoubtedly, your peers, other physicians, are aware of your concern and aware that you're sort of, and again, I don't think you're probably not going out into the street yelling and screaming, but you're certainly drawing attention to this. Are other physicians, when they're around you, do they feel defensive, or are they encouraging you? Tell us about the support or lack of it that you're getting from the doctors that you know.
It's both. When I started saying, Anna died of a medical error, people would say, oh, yeah, my aunt or my mother had the same thing happen, including physicians. But there's not many of us that are willing to stand up and stand out and say this is an issue. And so I've gotten a lot of negative feedback as well as positive feedback. I think, as a whole, doctors work really hard, and there's a lot of pressures on them. And what we haven't done is supported folks so that they have time to actually think what might be going on with this patient. I know I presented at Medical Grand Rounds. That's where a bunch of providers get together, physicians as well as other providers. And one of my residency mentors said, Carol, we just don't have time to sit and talk with the patients any longer. And you know what? That's where a lot of the answers come up, is when you have this dialogue with the patient so you actually understand what's going on with them. So I've gotten support, and I've gotten non-support.
What about, and again, I'm going to frame this under the guise that you are a practicing physician. Mm-hmm. When you see these kinds of medical errors, are there in fact formal, sort of speak, formal reports, formal complaints, incident reports, so to speak? A plane has an incident in the air, there's a big, long report that's made of it. When there is a medical error death, is that open to interpretation that it's a medical error, or is it pretty much recognized and so therefore there's reporting and follow-up?
So some errors are really easily recognized: wrong side surgery, wrong medication, things to that extent. The most recent, and those have incident reports filled out and are more easily followed up. The most recent release from the Institute of Medicine, Improving Diagnosis in Healthcare, that was their report that they released on Tuesday. They started talking about delays in diagnosis. And that's a much harder one to identify, because what is a delay? What is an acceptable amount of time for someone when they present to when they're actually diagnosed? In my case, in Anna's case, I believe she had a medical error because the delay in diagnosis was associated with chest pain. And you ask most people on the street, you have chest pain, you need to be seen right away. And I told her, you have to go to the ER. She told her own doctors, but the first suggested antacids, another said a certain medicine was treating it. So she literally went 2.5 months without it being formally investigated. And her autopsy showed she'd been having ongoing waves of heart attacks. So I think in many instances we know, and I'll go back to the earlier part of the question, we know when a mistake has been made. But in delays in diagnosis, the Institute of Medicine said that all of us will likely experience a meaningful delay in diagnosis in our lifetime, that one is not caught easily.
If you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio, talking to Dr. Carol Gunn. She is a practicing physician in Portland, Oregon, and is very concerned about medical error deaths. And the result of that, obviously, medical errors of all kinds. Lost her own sister about a little over a year ago. And she is very, very outspoken on this subject. Dr. Gunn, what about, again, when a patient has symptoms and, like your sister, chest pains, et cetera, what needs to happen if they feel like no one's listening to them?
I think they need to continue to speak up and get another opinion if necessary. I think if Anna had done that, we would have been in a different story today. But she told her own physicians, but she didn't go outside of that system and really say, look, I have this symptom. I'm really concerned about it. And I think when patients start demanding a little more and kind of demanding time of the physician, no, I really need to know why you're thinking the way you are. Why do you not think, my mother had this, my sister had this, and now I'm concerned. You just have to get the attention of the physician or the provider.
What about, the AMA? You go to doctor conferences. Is this subject brought up at all, or is it something that's sort of talked about in the corner, or is it ignored institutionally? Tell us about that.
Oh, institutionally, it's definitely discussed. I think, there's all sorts of changes going on in healthcare, and I think we haven't really looked at kind of the workload and how work is managed within the healthcare system. And so we're just asking sometimes, why don't you just do a little bit more? I need you to go back and do X, Y, and Z. And there's no room for no more. And so there are studies out there that show that a lot of physicians are working 60 to 70 hours a week. And so they don't have any more time to add on one more, review cycle. And so I think we have to re-look at how we manage healthcare in total.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions is, with all the changes in insurance, all the changes of how medicine is administered, all the changes in just the whole administration of the medical field and its relationships with its patients, are things becoming a little bit riskier out there? And again, we're not trying to be alarmist here at all. I'm just curious as to as a physician that treats patients, do you feel like, wow, the distance between the doctor and the patient is getting farther?
I do think the distance is getting further. And I even feel it for myself. There's not enough time spent just sitting there and understanding what's going on with me to figure out why I might be having a certain symptom or not.
So you're saying, again, the doctors are obviously as well educated as they've ever been. What is causing this, do you think? I mean, if you look at your own practice, for example, why do you feel like that chasm's getting bigger?
I think it's getting bigger because people are being asked to do more in less time. And then on top of that, in many practice situations, my practice is not there yet, they have the electronic medical record, and that consumes a lot of time. And the electronic medical record, when we're taught in medical school, if someone presents with a certain symptom, we were taught to consider, could it be this? That's the worst case scenario. If it's not this, then we will consider the second diagnosis, which would be a little less as a significant of a diagnosis. But you're not seeing that description in an electronic medical record because it's all click and the boxes. So there's no discussion. Why might this person be having a certain symptom and what might be causing that? That part has been left out of the electronic medical record. It's more for an insurance billing reasons that we do the electronic medical record, not for giving good information to the next provider.
It is estimated around 200,000 people die every year from preventable medical mistakes. Curious as to, do these fall into one general category of medicine, or is it spread throughout? And if it is one or two larger categories, share with our listeners a little bit what those might be.
No, it spread throughout. And what happened was Dr. James, who put out that number, he actually estimates between 200,000 and 400,000. What he did is went back and did an evidence-based look at several reviews of medical records, and then estimated the reason, the number from there. So he looked at reports, he looked at, I believe, autopsies, and he looked at adverse events where people were reporting that. And that number since has been looked at by other Medicare, where they were looking at Medicare events, and it comes up similarly that there's approximately that number of deaths. The problem is, and that's why you hear me hesitating a little bit, is we don't have a great system to capture, one system to capture all the events. And so what might be called a medical error at one institution might not be at another institution.
Okay, so you have presented the case that we need to be aware of this. You've certainly shined the light on it. What should we, what can we, what are we morally bound, et cetera, et cetera? What should we do as patients, members of the general public? What do we need to be most aware of? What do we need to do? How do we react to all of this, so to speak?
Well, I actually think we need to start sharing our stories openly about this. I am involved with a group called the Patient Safety Movement, and I know they're going to be starting to gather stories on Tuesday, and Anna's story is shared on their website. But I think we need to actually stand up and say, I've had an error, and have information come back to share about that, because it's not until we start pointing out how many there are that we will need to start getting more attention on it, and there just isn't attention on it.
So does that suddenly mean you throw down and you put the medical practice on hold and you're all over the country speaking, or tell us about that? What can you do? Because again, obviously as a physician, you have got some very major commitments.
Right, and I have cut back on my own practice, and I'm speaking. I did a TEDx, and my TEDx talk should be released in about a week or so, and it's called Medical Errors, the Silent Killer in Medicine. I've spoken to medical groups. I'm speaking to different radio groups. I'm just trying to get the word out there so it becomes a discussion topic. It's kind of like having the hashtag Patients' Lives Matter. And I think there's different groups that have different responsibilities. The healthcare executives have the responsibility to give transparency to this issue and give money to the issue. Physicians have the responsibility of going back and telling another physician, you made a mistake here. How did that happen? Why don't we talk about it so it doesn't happen again? And one of my mistakes, we've all made mistakes as physicians. One of the mistakes that happened that I made, a patient actually came back and told me. And that's a gift, because now I know what happened and I can look at it for the next time. But if she hadn't come back and told me, I never would have known. So we owe that to our physicians, and as physicians we owe that to other providers to start sharing that information.
Well, it is a very serious subject indeed. Obviously, medical errors and the ultimate deaths that occur as a result of them. Dr. Carol Gunn has been our guest. She is, again, a practicing physician in Portland, Oregon. Dr. Gunn, how, again, can people find out more about the work that you're doing, research on the subject and the subject in general?
The work I'm doing, www.carolgunnmd, that's 2 N's, carolgunnmd.com. They can search the Institute of Medicine to find out more about the recent reports, and just put Google medical errors would also work.
Well, we appreciate you spending some time today. Best of luck to you, and thank you for bringing this again to our attention, or at least enlightening us a little bit more on this subject, and would like to have you on again sometime.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.